This is a test scene of the T-Rex from the original Jurassic Park. But not only is it just a test scene, what you're seeing here is perhaps one of the most seminal moments in the history of cinema. This is the clip that made filmmakers realize the potential of computer graphics. This was done on computers that hardly had the processing capabilities of the smartphones that you're watching this on. So every frame took about 12 hours to render, a combined 4 minutes worth of CGI. Now that was a whole year of painstaking hard work. But this was more than 30 years ago. Computers have become exponentially faster, and studios are willing to spend more money on films. And with all of that aligning perfectly, you would expect computer graphics to be light years ahead of its early days. But why does the general consensus seem to feel the exact opposite? Why do scenes like this define the current state of CGI? Why is it that CGI seems to be regressing while technology is progressing? So, to understand this paradox, you have to start here, at this very scene from Jurassic Park. This was a moment in time when there was a problem to be solved, when artists were realizing that computers could render scenes that could not be replicated in reality. At least not with the freedom of expression you could attain in the computer. So it was largely experimental, but at the same time, it was always used as a tool to bridge the gap between what was possible and what was feasible. Steven Spielberg and his team could have gone with hundreds of shots of CGI, but they didn't. For the technology was only to be used to enhance the story, not be the story itself. And so, in a film with a duration of 2 hours, you end up with CGI shots that are a combined 4 minutes long. Everything else would be practically attained. Still, not too bad for the time. Fast forward to the start of the next decade, computer graphics had become commonplace in cinema. In The Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson and Weta Studios would only use CGI when it could enhance the shot. If you take a look at the behind the scenes from The Lord of the Rings, you'd realize that there were quite a number of CG elements that blend in with the practical environments and props. They'd even developed a new kind of software to enhance the lighting effects on the skin, known as subsurface scattering. This was another step in the right direction for computer graphics. And although I don't have an accurate estimate for the number of CG shots, in the Fellowship of the Ring alone, they did end up using about 480 visual effects shots, perhaps groundbreaking for the time. And with every passing year, the processing power of computers was on the rise. And with that advancing technology, the level of CGI, it just kept getting better. And perhaps you could say that it was in 2006 that we achieved the pinnacle of CGI. Just like Andy Serkis's mocap performance for Gollum, Bill Nye's real-life performance would be traced by the artist while creating the expressive realism on Davy Jones's face. And the result is something truly remarkable. The motion of the individual tentacles, the subsurface scattering on the skin, everything was just visually authentic. You could not look at this character and say something was off. It was that perfect. But even here, there was a balance. Dead Man's Chest had an approximate shot count of 3,000, out of which estimates would suggest the use of CGI in about 1,000 of them. Now that would mean a third of the film had some kind of CGI in it. But this balance would reach a tipping point. By the time we reached 2012, the Avengers would release with a whopping VFX shot count of 2,200. And in case you're wondering, that is roughly 80% of the film. So this was not just CGI assisted. This was CGI driven storytelling. But this is where too much of anything becomes good for nothing. All the movies that are mentioned in this video are not just any movies, but they are blockbusters of their respective time periods. And the thing about blockbusters is that they define time periods in cinema. You pick a film like The Lord of the Rings and you'll see similar adventure fantasies made around it. It's basically studios following a formula. And when you follow the blockbusters, a very obvious pattern emerges from it. Jurassic Park, which had a total of 63 VFX shots, only had about 4% of its total runtime involving some kind of CG. But in the Fellowship of the Ring, this would go up to about 25%. And by the time we reached Dead Man's Chest, this would climb to about 33%, and 6 years later in the Avengers, an overwhelming 80%. What was supposed to be a tool that was developed to bridge the gap between the real and the feasible had now become the main attraction. CGI had now become blatant. And I think we have not yet recovered from this. Most of the blockbusters that pull in huge numbers for the studios are all decorated with computer graphics. It has become ever so uncommon to see blockbusters that have limited CGI. And if anything, since the Avengers in 2012, that percentage has only gone up. The last time I checked, more than 90% of the shots in Endgame had some kind of visual effects in them. But this only tells you half the story. CGI has taken the main stage, sure, but that doesn't have to be a problem though. It does kill an aspect of cinema that you could only capture through the lens, but nonetheless, it also opens opportunities to dream bigger. And by no means did I say that these movies are necessarily bad. In fact, all 4 of the Avengers films have got some of the best CGI and visual effects shots I have ever seen. But this rapid increase in the number of CGI shots meant only one thing. The thing that had worked out in favor of all these films, the thing that helped them create some of the best CGI shots we have ever seen, is now becoming an elusive commodity: time. I'd gone into this subject thinking this was a clear paradox. How is it that computer graphics could be evolving backwards while we have computers that are thousands of times more powerful than the ones from the 90s? And maybe the answer lies within the variable of time. You see, most of the mainstream films utilize thousands of CGI shots, but they do so under the same production timelines from the past, and in some cases rushing things even more to meet the unrealistic demands of the studios. Now, I want to show you a metric that corroborates this claim. It's a metric that I measured called days spent per VFX shot. In Jurassic Park, released in '93, the number of VFX shots adds up to 63, and since the post-production lasted for about 10 months, that would give you roughly 4.5 days to complete one VFX shot. And although you can't exactly predict how much time is spent on every individual shot, this metric gives you the average time spent on a single shot. And as you go down this table, you can see another pattern emerging. The total number of VFX shots keep rising, but the days spent on these shots keep falling. And this is a problem, because it's a pattern that you see not just in specific movies, but is ever present throughout the industry. If you take a look at almost all the films that were criticized for having shoddy visual effects, the problem can be defined using the same metric. This is a list of movies, predominantly Marvel, that were all responsible for questionable CGI. And if you look at the total number of VFX shots and compare it to the days the artist spent on the average shot, it looks incredibly bleak. And maybe you could point to the fact that computers are faster, so they probably wouldn't need that much time on a single shot. And although that's a valid point that you could make, you gotta also realize that there are artists, like real people who are working behind the computers. And the way we act under pressure, or feel creative blocks, or just emotional strain, these factors haven't really changed much in 30 years. How could you possibly hope to get consistent results in CGI when you're expected to crunch an average shot in less than 2 hours for a whole year? It is simply unsustainable in every shape and form. And so, there are too many VFX shots in the modern blockbuster, and the time allocated for these shots are indeed quite short. So the question is, will this paradox always persist in cinema? And I guess the simple answer is yes, mainly because studios don't really care. At the end of the day, if mediocre CGI gets the job done with tight production schedules and lots of money in their pocket, why would they try to change it? But that's why the complicated no is the more interesting answer. You see, I don't think CGI is the problem here. Remember how at the very beginning, the whole purpose of CGI was to be used as a tool to tell a better story. It shouldn't pop out to grab your attention away from the actual storytelling. In other words, the CGI is never the spectacle. And that's something that is still the case these days. It's just that sometimes you don't really notice it. In fact, almost all of the films you watch do probably utilize some form of CGI, even if it is on the tiniest scale. But that's the thing, good CGI is almost invisible to the untrained eyes. There was a lot of noise about how there was no CGI in Top Gun Maverick, that everything was practically done, but that is not quite true. There is a lot of CGI in there, but it's really well done that you don't really notice it. There's a good video on YouTube explaining all the CGI elements and VFX in that movie. It's a good watch to understand the invisible CGI that works like a charm in almost all films. This shot in Barbie looks like a miniature, but it's actually CG. This shot looks like an aerial view of New York City, but again, it is completely CG. And in this scene from Mission Impossible, the whole environment is CG. And even some of the elements in a Christopher Nolan film like Inception are generated in the computer. And if you have ever wondered, do they actually destroy all those cars in the Fast and the Furious films? Well, you know where this is going. The point is, the scope of most of the stories that we're telling these days do require some kind of CGI. If you want a crowd of people gathered in the streets, the cost-effective way of doing that would be to bring in a decent amount of people and then extend the shot using CGI. And if you do it correctly, it's unlikely that people will notice it. But if you tighten the schedules, over-depend on CGI, and thereby overworking your VFX studios, shots such as this will keep happening. I strictly want to emphasize that the CGI paradox is an approach-related problem. It has nothing to do with devolving technology or incompetent artists, but it's simply a result of massive studios not wanting to use technology as a tool anymore. It's a supply and demand issue where companies are treating art and stories as if they are products that you sell off your shelves. And in doing that, you get the worst products, half-finished and rushed and filled with anomalies of the uncanny. It's just bound to happen. What else can you expect? But at the end of the day, the answer remains, if you want to have a good product, by all means, go ahead and use CGI, but do so in a measured way. Don't try to be the spectacle, but be the tool that creates the spectacle.